Hello all, and welcome back to Philosophy on a Monday, and we're in the middle of the metaphysics of God. And today we're going to start a new topic. We're going to be looking at the problem of evil. We're actually going to be looking at several problems of evil. And really what we're asking when we're doing this is whether the God that we have tried to describe and define in the first part of our topic, whether God's attributes can be reconciled with the existence of evil. So can these attributes such as, and I'm sure you know the ones that we're going to pick up on here, so God's omnipotence, or his ability to have all power, and another issue that is really key here is God's omnibenevolence, God's loving nature. So if we've got evil in the world, can we reconcile? Can we bring together that with these attributes of omnipotence and omnibenevolence? So you need to know what evil is and the nature of two different types of evil, moral evil and natural evil. And we tend to mean by evil, we mean suffering that's experienced by feeling beings. So with natural evil, we tend to describe it as physical and is caused independently of human action. So examples of this could be things like disease, famine, natural disasters, earthquakes, things like that. And on the other side, we've got moral evil, which we tend to define as pain and suffering that's a result of human action, of human decision making, of human agency. And examples of this would be murder, rape, and sort of more basic ideas of lying and stealing that are going to lead to suffering of human beings. So if we consider this is quite a key question. Which one of these types of evil conflicts most with the concept of God, and why? Have a think. Well, I'm hoping that you are going to point towards this type of evil. Because can you see that at least with moral evil, we have some kind of explanation for it. It's the fault of humans. But when it comes to natural evil, then it seems very much built into a world that if we are claiming that God, the creator, made, that could have been avoided. So natural evil seems to conflict most with the concept of God. But some people think that natural evil might be a form or a result of moral evil. When you think about it, human actions such as over-farming and deforestation can lead to some natural disasters, and it can also lead to disease. And if we look at the coronavirus outbreak and the causes of that would certainly back this idea up. So have a look at this 5 marker, outline and explain the similarities and differences in natural and moral evil. Please pause and have a go at that. So now we're going to look at the problem of evil, and we're going to break it into 2 types, as the exam would do. So on the left-hand side, we've got something called the logical problem of evil. Now, this is a deductive form of argument, and it is looking at evil and the attributes of God a priori. They're saying that there's certain things here that do not add up. They are logically impossible, incompatible, and they reach a conclusion that God cannot exist. On the other hand, we've got an evidential problem of evil, and that's more of an abductive argument that looks at the weight of argument, the weight of evidence in our experience that leads to a weaker conclusion that God is unlikely to exist in a world like this. So it takes an a posteriori, and it's formed in an inductive way. Let's start by looking at the logical problem of evil, and it was put forward by David Hume and Mackey, and it's sometimes referred to as an inconsistent triad, so a three-pointed shape that has three elements that are incompatible. So we have got the idea that God is omnipotent, and we also have the idea, this God of classical theism, that God is omnibenevolent, and yet we have evil existing. So I want you to follow the logic of the argument beneath the triad. And what we have introduced here is omniscience as well. You don't need to, but it does fit with the attributes. So if God is omnibenevolent, he must want to get rid of evil because he's loving. If God is omnipotent, then he is able to get rid of evil. He can do something about it. If God is all-knowing, he knows that evil exists. Therefore, if God exists, evil should not exist. Yet evil does exist. Therefore, God cannot exist. Now, I just want you to look closely at the way that this argument is put together, and I want you to see that what we've come to here is a very strong and certain conclusion that God cannot exist. So we've got a very strong and certain conclusion. We've used deductive argumentation down here, so it's deductive. And it's showing that the idea of a loving God who's all-powerful is contradictory to evil. Okay. An abductive argument. So let me just write it over here. Ooh. Abductive. And that's really an approach that looks at the best explanation for the evidence that we can see in our lives. So an abductive approach is the best explanation. Now, we've looked at these before when we looked at the work of people like Bertrand Russell in epistemology. Okay, so what we're doing is we're using the evidence and the reasons that we see around us to persuade us to accept a weaker conclusion that it's very unlikely that a God can exist in a world like this. So looking at the outline of the argument then. So on balance, the existence of evil in the world persuades us that the existence of an all-powerful, supremely good God does not exist. Why is there so much pain and suffering in the world? Why doesn't God intervene in terms of natural disasters and moral evil? The evidence for many stack up against the theist claim that the God of classical theism exists. Now, the I would use for this is Rowe and his example of animal suffering. So Rowe says that, looking at the evidence of our world and the kinds of things that happen, would these kinds of things happen if a loving and all-powerful God existed? So Rowe gives the example of suffering that seems gratuitous or without a point. And he comes up with the idea of a deer trapped and burning in a forest fire who suffers immensely for days before eventually dying. Now, okay, this example doesn't disprove the existence of God, but Rowe says it kind of makes the idea of God's existence unlikely. So we're looking at weight of evidence and being persuaded that a God, a loving God, and a God who cares and a God who can intervene is very unlikely. So this is a different kind of argument. So the evidential using evil. Inductive,
is looking at the weight
abductive reasoning, coming down on the side that there probably isn't a God, looking at the evidence of suffering in the universe. Now, different people respond to evil in different ways, and we have got some atheists who respond to evil, and obviously they don't have to account for God. So we have people like Sartre, who is clear that there is no God and that humans are abandoned by the very idea of a God and have to face the horror of evil alone. And his approach was certainly one that people just have to face up to situations and deal with them the best way they can. And we have to make ourselves the best that we can in the situations that we find ourselves in. And we've got Mary Midgley, another atheist, who looks closely at moral evil, and she calls that wickedness. And she's very clear about it. It's completely a human issue. It's nothing to do with God. And we have to try and understand why people commit evil acts, and we have to try and work through these things and improve ourselves. And there's a bit of reading and note-taking to do on Midgley, please. Okay, but our main task is to look at responses from people who actually do believe in the God of classical theism, because what we've got to do is try to reconcile God's attributes to the existence of evil. Now, atheists are not going to do that. So what we need to really focus in on are two particular responses to the problem of evil. And these are theistic responses. So these are from believers in this God who has certain attributes. And what we call these solutions or responses to the problem of evil is theodicies, okay? And this is from the Greek for theo, God, and dike, which means just. So it's kind of providing a justification for God with the existence of evil in the world. You need to be really clear on what a theodicy is. So down the left-hand side, it's an attempt to explain evil while maintaining the classical theistic definition of God, having the attributes of omnipotence and supreme goodness, or all loving nature. And there are two theodicies that you really need to get to know. You need to know the free will defense from Plantinga. And Plantinga is very much based on the idea of St. Augustine of Hippo's traditional theodicy. And then the second one is the soul-making theodicy from John Hick. And that was very much based on somebody else, St. Irenaeus, from way back. So in summary today, we've covered defining the two different types of evil, natural and moral. We've also gone through outlining the logical problem of evil and the evidential problem of evil. And you should be able to compare and contrast those two different types of evil. And we've also outlined the nature of the theodicy. So next time, we're going to sort of delve into these two very famous theodicies and assess their success.